Hi everyone, welcome back to another class. I'm Sarah and today we'll be talking about makeup brushes. So in this class I will cover first of all the different kinds of bristles. So we have natural bristles versus synthetic bristles. I will talk about the different kinds of brushes there are in the market. So brushes for face, for your eyes, for your lips, and for your cheeks and eyebrows. And I will also be giving you some tips as to how to use certain brushes and if you really do need all the brushes that are available on the market. So I hope this class is useful. Thank you very much for watching and let's get to the class. So when it comes to makeup brushes, there are two main kinds of bristles. So the very first one will be natural bristle brushes. So for example, this is the Morphe M527, which is a natural bristled bronzer brush. Now I'm going to bring it up closer to you so you can kind of see the bristles. Okay, so first of all, notice that they are not generally straight. They are quite kinky, like, natural hair is. And they have a lot more texture to them. Okay, and they generally do not gravitate towards each other because of the texture in the hair. So what are natural bristles? Natural bristles are usually derived from animals, like squirrels, rabbits, and I believe sometimes goat hair as well. Okay, so what this does basically is that your natural bristles basically have a lot more texture. That's the biggest difference in my opinion. Okay, so the texture of the bristles ultimately determine how they apply your products as well as how the products look after application. Okay, so now let's talk about the other bristle, which is synthetic bristles. So for example, this is the Real Techniques blush brush. So you can kind of see, I'll bring it in again, the hairs are a lot more straight and it's a lot smoother than the natural bristles. And if you realize, the synthetic bristles tend to kind of gravitate towards each other, and that's actually because the texture of the hairs are a lot smoother. So what is the big difference here? Now, synthetic bristles, like its name suggests, are made from synthetic fibers. I think, if I'm not wrong, Real Techniques ones are made from Taclon, but I'm not very sure. So what is the difference is that because the fibers or the bristles are so smooth, they are excellent in picking up products and then basically depositing them the moment they touch your skin. So for any liquid or creams, I love to use synthetic bristles. Whereas if it comes for powder, I love natural bristles. Now, if you're going to use natural bristles for creams or liquids, the bristles will absorb a lot more product, so that could result in a bit of product wastage, so do keep that in mind. So generally, my recommendation is natural bristles when it comes to powder, so like bronzer, blusher, face powder. And then, of course, for your foundation and concealer, generally I would prefer synthetic bristles. But that's my personal preference. Now, when it comes to combination of those, there are some brushes that combine both bristles. And this is an example. So this brush is the Sigma Duo Fiber F50. You can see it's actually a combination of synthetic and natural fibers. Natural bristles. So if you take a look here, the brown ones are the natural bristles. The white ones, synthetic bristles. Okay, so what this kind of brush does is it basically, the synthetic bristles, because it's much longer, as you can see, they will pick up the product, and then the natural ones basically help to blend it out a lot more, because natural bristles, remember, they always hold on to more product. So when you actually apply it, so especially like for foundation and things like that, you actually get a lot more of a natural finish and a lot more kind of like a lighter coverage because of the bristles here. Now, different bristles can also apply for eye brushes. So for example, this is the famous MAC 217. It's their famous blending brush. If I'm not wrong, this is made from goat hair. And then of course you have synthetic brushes for eyes as well. So for example, this is also a blending brush, but it's definitely synthetic bristles. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using natural versus synthetic bristles? Now, for natural bristles, so for example these two, they grab onto a lot more product, and when they hold on to it and you apply it, it actually gives you a lot more of a natural finish, and your products on your face will look very blended out. natural bristles are very soft, especially if you buy the great quality ones, like of course the Hakuhodo brand, and I think the Ray Morris's are all very expensive, but they're extremely soft. And because they don't gravitate towards each other, the bristles allow you to give a very kind of like a blended effect. Whereas when it comes to synthetic, so for example these two, synthetic brushes, the biggest advantage, first of all, I think is maintenance. Now because the bristles are kind of actually synthetic, it's a lot easier to wash and it's a lot easier to maintain as well. They hold on to their shape a lot easier. And also they are great for liquids and creams because they don't hold on to the product, so you don't waste any products, or you don't waste as much if you use natural bristles. And the last thing is because they are generally cheaper. So my favorite brand of synthetic bristle brushes are Real Techniques, and they are a lot more affordable than a lot of the other natural bristle brushes out there. So if you're a makeup beginner, synthetic brushes can be a good option for you. Okay, just keep in mind that for synthetic brushes, because the product gets sucked in and then released the moment it touches the skin, you have to be very careful when it comes to blending. But if you work around it, like, you know, you just work it into the skin over time, it will be fine. So just keep that in mind. So now that we talked about the different kinds of bristles, we're now going to talk about bristle length as well as the density of the bristles and what kind of effect it will give you. Let's talk about density of the bristles and how it affects your application. Now, what exactly is density? It's basically how tightly packed the bristles are. So I want to show you, these two are very similar foundation brushes. This is the Real Techniques. I believe it's like a sculpting brush. And then this is the Sigma F84. So these two are angled face brushes. They are great for cream bronzes and contours because of their slanted shape, or they're just generally great for foundation application. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to is take a look at the density of the bristles. I don't know if you realize, but the Sigma one, the one on the left, is a lot tight, not a lot, but it's definitely tighter than the Real Techniques one. You can see a lot more gaps between the bristles for the Real Techniques one versus the Sigma one. I hope you can kind of see the difference. Now, what this does is, the denser the brush, the more coverage you're actually going to get. So that's why you realize a lot of foundation brushes, they generally have they pack a lot of bristles in one. So another example of a foundation brush right here, you can see it's pretty dense. You don't see a lot of gaps. So the denser the brush, the more coverage you're going to get, ultimately because the bristles hold on to a lot more product. Now, when it holds on to a lot more product, and the moment you put it onto your skin, the more product is going to be on your skin, and therefore with the brush being so packed, it will also kind of like push the product into your skin better than something that is more loosely packed. So therefore, denser brushes are great for higher coverage purposes. So if I go back to the stippling brush, you can kind of see the density is a lot less. You can see a lot more gaps, right? So that's why when it comes to stippling brushes as well, basically the finished product is a lot more natural because the coverage is not going to be as intense as a denser brush. So just to recap, density is how tightly packed the bristles are. Now, the next thing we also need to talk about that affects your application is actually the length of the bristles. Think of it this way: the longer the bristle length, the less control you have, because if you're going to put your hand, let's say, at the edge of the handle, your power is right here, but it's further away from where it's going to touch your skin if the bristle length is longer. I hope that makes sense. So usually when it comes to products that you really want to have control over application, you will generally find that the bristle lengths are a lot shorter. Whereas if it's longer bristles, like for example the stippling brush is quite long, or even my bronzer brush, the one that I showed you at the beginning, the bristle length is actually pretty long. So if I show you, for example, the foundation brush, you can kind of see the difference in length of the bristles, and ultimately it's because the longer the bristles, the less control you're going to have. So the product, when you apply it, it's going to be a lot more dispersed, it's going to look a lot more natural. And the shorter the bristles, you have a lot, okay, the shorter the bristles just means you have a lot more control, and that means you kind of also have a bit more pressure because your hand is closer to where the brush touches your skin, and because of the pressure, the products are pressed in more, you have a higher coverage as a result of that. So the two things you need to keep in mind will be, of course, the length of the bristles as well as the density of bristles. So now let's move on to the category of face brushes. So I'm going to categorize face brushes as for foundation and mostly concealer. So the general foundation brush out there is actually a buffing brush. Now what does buffing mean? It basically means the bristles are tightly packed and it helps to buff your foundation into the skin. There are many different shapes out there. So for example, this is the Sigma 3D HD Kabuki. As you can see, it's kind of like it points up to the tip right there like a triangle. So what it does, it's supposedly giving you a lot more control over the angles of your face. So like that. You can also have something like this. This is the Zoeva silk finish brush. So as you can see, this one again is a very dense brush and it's rounded at the top like that. Pretty dense. Again, for foundation. Now, some people do say that rounded brushes like that are better for powder foundations, like the Bare Minerals powder foundations. Personally, I struggle when I use dense brushes for powder foundations, so I usually keep these for liquid foundations. We can also have the one that I showed you. So, for example, this is another Sigma brush. As you can see here, this is the flat angled Kabuki. Same thing, it's a Kabuki brush, it's very dense, but it's pointed to the side, like that. So basically gives you a little angle when you apply your foundation on your face. Then, of course, we also have the ones that I showed you just now for the examples. So these are also Kabuki brushes, they're angled Kabukis, this one as well. So what exactly is the difference? I personally feel that the difference is really ultimately your personal preference. Now, for example, if you feel that, you have more control, you feel more comfortable with a brush shaped like that, then of course this brush would be good for you. For example, if you feel that, you like the versatility of a thinner, angled brush, then of course something like that will work great for you. So what do you look out for when it comes to choosing a face brush? Really simple. It just depends ultimately on the density of the brush. Do you think that it's dense enough to give you the coverage that you think you need, as well as the length? So generally, I feel that a lot of the foundation brushes out there, the bristles are not that long, so you're not going to lose that much control. So I think ultimately, sorry, I keep saying that. So I think when choosing a foundation brush, just choose one that is affordable for you, firstly, and secondly, you feel comfortable using it. So I do recommend Real Techniques. They have like their expert face brushes and all that, which work really great. I just don't have it with me right now, but they are a great starter for face brushes. So as long as you find something that's synthetic and you feel comfortable holding it, using it to buff product into your skin, you're pretty much good to go when it comes to finding a foundation brush. So I also have this. So as you can see, this is a Tarte foundation brush and it is huge. So if I compare this to, let's say, Sigma one that I was using just now, just look at the difference in terms of the diameter of the brush. So what is the difference here? It really is, I cover a lot more surface when I use the Tarte. So if I'm in a rush, I basically just use this and I like go a few strokes around my face and I'm pretty much done. So, but one thing I would say though is because the Tarte one is so big, you don't have as much control, because if, let's say, I want to go along the sides of like my temple area, for example, this is a little bit big, so what I'll do is I'll kind of like squeeze it and then I'll go along my temples. So generally I think this size of a brush is good enough for me, and that's what I would recommend first. This one is a nice brush, but it's not something that I feel everyone needs. Now, so in addition to the buffing brush, you also have the traditional paddle brushes. So for example, this is the Sigma foundation brush. So this is a paddle brush, thin like that, flat like that. So it looks like a face brush, a painting brush. So because it looks like a paintbrush, the ultimate purpose of it really is to kind of apply foundation onto the skin. So imagine if you dip it into foundation, you kind of like press it onto your skin like that. Now, I personally don't prefer to blend my foundation with this because I find that it leaves quite a bit of streaks. So if I ever do have to use this brush, what I'll do is I'll use it to kind of put foundation where I want it, either on my face or my client's face, and then I'll go back, you know, with any like buffing brush like that, and then just to really buff it out. Because I feel that buffing in the foundation gives it a better look on the skin versus if you swipe like that. Does that make sense? I hope so. Because if you think about it, when you swipe or you do that, you know, it's kind of moving the foundation instead of kind of pushing it into the skin. So definitely something like a buffing brush to push the product in to give you the coverage that you want is what I would recommend. So do you really need this? Personally, I don't think you need, and I don't think you need it unless, you know, maybe you're a makeup artist, you want like a way to apply foundation onto your client's skin without putting your fingers on it, then this is something great. One thing good for foundation brushes like that too, it gives you a lot of control because of the, can you see it's tapered at the end here, like that. It's tapered, and because it's so flat, it gives you kind of like the ability to create that edge. So if I put it against my hand, you can kind of see if I want to create a sharp line, maybe like, you know, use a bit of concealer to clean up something, I can definitely use this brush as well. Then of course, we also have tapered buffing kabuki brushes. So for example, this is the Morphe G2, and then this is the Sigma tapered kabuki. So as you can see, it's again very dense, but it's pointed to a tip like that. So what I like to do with this is actually I use it for my under eye concealer, because your under eye, sometimes a big buffing brush like that may not be able to fit underneath the eye really well. You might poke your eye, you know, and things like that. But for this one, because it's pointed to a tip, it's a lot easier to kind of like blend your under eye concealer, or, you know, spot correcting. So if let's say I have a pimple right here, I will just use that to like blend it in. So as you can see, the Sigma one's a lot more tapered versus the Morphe one. But ultimately the shape, it's kind of up to you again which one you prefer. I feel that for under eye concealer, I prefer the Sigma one just because it's a lot more precise. So like I said, if I wanted to clean up maybe my eyeshadow, I can, you know, at least have that control. Versus this one, you know, the line may not be as straight. Okay, and then lastly, for face, you can use your stippling brushes. Now those of you with really good skin, you just want, you know, light coverage to, you know, even out your skin tone, dual fiber brushes are really great because they apply the foundation really naturally. So it gives you a really kind of like natural glow of, you know, it gives you a really good natural coverage on your skin. There is another example of a dual fiber brush. This one is, for example, the Zoeva Petite Stippling Brush. So you can see it's dual fiber again, but this time round, the synthetic bristles are not as long as the Sigma one, right? So again, it's basically what finish you want to get. So because the difference in bristles is not that big, this one's going to give me a lot, not a lot, but definitely more coverage than the other one. So because this one, both bristles will generally touch the face. So I think that, you know, it really again depends on what you are looking out for when it comes to your foundation or face brush. When it comes to powder, because once you're done with your foundation and your concealer, you're going to move on to powder. Generally, powder brushes, there are again different shapes, different sizes, and also different fibers. So for example, this one is a tapered powder brush. This is called the Luxe Face Definer from Zoeva Natural Bristle Brush, and you can see it's kind of like a little bit tapered and circular. And then for example, I have this one, which is the Bella Pierre, let me see, powder brush. This one is tapered, and I believe this is actually natural bristled as well. Really soft. And then the last one I have is a Makeup Revolution powder brush. This one is actually synthetic bristles, so actually I don't really use this much for powder. So for powder brushes, so as I mentioned in the first one, I prefer using natural bristle because it just holds on to products and deposits deposits the product over time versus, you know, you dip it in and apply and all the product comes out at the same time. So I do generally prefer natural bristle brushes when it comes to powder. The shape is really, again, up to you because ultimately you're kind of going around your whole face to set the makeup. So usually what I prefer is I like something pretty big. I like longer bristle brushes because then when I apply my powder, I have less pressure, so therefore I won't have too much powder on one area, if that makes sense. So usually what I do, I actually prefer this shape. It's just my personal preference. I'll put a little bit of powder, swirl it around in the cap or whatever, and then I go to my face and I just like lightly dust it. Because for me, powder is to set my makeup, not to further add coverage, so I don't need something that will provide me with a lot of powder application at once. So something like that will work for powder as well. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about cheek brushes. There is a lot. So for example, these are just some brushes that I feel can be used for the cheek area because the cheek involves contouring, bronzing. You also have highlighting and blush. So there is a large variety of brushes out there for the cheeks. Now, do you need to have all of it? No. It's again personal preference, but just let me show you a few so you can kind of see what is out there and, you know, if it fits what you want. So for blush, let's talk a little bit about blush first. For blush, basically you want to apply blush on the apples of your cheeks, right? So usually they will have specific brushes. Like this is the Eco Tools blush brush. I actually really like this because again it's tapered, and actually what I do with this brush, because of its shape, I just dip it into the blusher, go to the apples of my cheeks, and then I just simply tap it in and then slowly swipe it. So I do like the shape of this. This is, I believe, a natural bristle brush, the Eco Tools one, and it's quite affordable. I got mine off iHerb. And then you can also have the slanted one. These are the more typical ones. So this, for example, is the Luxe Sheer Cheek brush from Zoeva. As you can see, it's slanted, so it fits perfectly on the apples of your cheeks. It can also work for like bronzing because, you know, because of the slanted angle, it goes really nicely to do your three, you know, your forehead, your cheeks, and then your jaw. So it works really well. I do like it, and again, it's not that dense as you can see, so therefore it will be a lot more of a natural application of blusher versus something that's a lot denser. We can also have something like that. So this one is a Jessup brush. Now Jessup is a brand I believe you can find on like eBay, on Amazon. I got mine actually off eBay like 4 years ago. But I really like it. It's a very affordable brand. Now this is a dual fiber powder blush. Oh, powder slash blush brush. Okay, so that was a mouthful. But if you take a look, same thing. Black one is natural, white one is synthetic. Now, what it does again, because think of it as whenever it's dual fiber, you're just going to get a lot more natural, lighter finish of your product. So, and the shape, again, it's tapered. So this is really good for you to kind of focus your product on a certain part of your face and give it a very natural, sheer kind of like finish to it. So I like this. Now, if you feel like you tend to go heavy-handed with your blush, or you know, you use really pigmented blushes, like for example NARS is extremely pigmented, and I had a few times where I really have to blend it out because a whole pink spot landed on my cheeks. A dual fiber brush is great because generally due to the way the fibers are made, you won't get like a lot of product deposition at one time, so it's a lot more natural. So I do like this brush as well. And the other one which I feel is really great for blush is actually named a highlighting brush. So this is, for example, the e.l.f. highlighting brush. But personally for me, my cheeks at least, it's a little bit out of shape, but you can kind of see it's a little bit big for me. So for me, I mostly highlight the top of my cheekbone. So this feels a little bit bulky for me. But what this is great for, I feel, is blush. So it fits really nicely on the apples of my cheeks, and I just slowly, like, you know, bring it from the temples down. It works quite good for bronzer as well, especially if you have a small face, because big bronzer brushes, like for example, the one I showed you, my Morphe one, wait, where is it? So if you have a small face and you use a bronzer brush like this, what could happen is your face will just be really bronze. Like bronzer will pretty much get everywhere. So if you choose a smaller brush like that, you have a lot more control. You can see where your bronzer is going, and because the bristles are quite long, they basically give a very kind of like blended and diffused look with your bronzer and blushes. So I do recommend this brush, just not for highlighting. Now when it comes to a special kind of brush, you can technically also use fan brushes. I know some famous makeup artists, they use fan brushes for blush, and it's actually because of the way it's shaped. So what they do is they kind of use the angle of the brush to apply blush on the cheeks like so. I haven't mastered that technique yet, so actually this brush is just kind of hanging around in my collection, but ultimately I would see this as great for contouring as well because of the angle. So you can go underneath your cheekbones to apply that contour powder and then, you know, blend it out with your bronzer or things like that. You also can have a much smaller fan brush. So for example, this is the Real Techniques one. I like this a lot for highlighting. Again, it's dual fibered, which basically means you won't go overboard and it looks a lot more natural. So some highlighters are really glittery, like you know, I end up looking like a disco ball if I don't do it right. So something like that will work really well, and it's really focused. So you can go on top of your cheekbones, down your nose, you know, and it gives you a lot of control because of how thin the bristles are. And the length of the bristles is not very long as well, hopefully you can see. So that's quite okay. I do like this, but I do think this one came in a set. This is the fan brush. And when it comes to my favorite highlighting brush, I'm sorry, it's a little bit dirty, but this is my favorite. This is the Morphe Y14. So it's small, as you can see, versus, you know, for example, the e.l.f. one, which they say is for highlighting. So what this does is it gives me a lot of control of where I can place my highlighter on my cheekbones. And as you can see, it's also tapered, right? So therefore, I use the tapered side to my advantage, put it on my cheekbones, and I'm good to go. So I've been using this brush almost every day, so sorry it's a bit dirty, but something like that works really well for me. However, some people prefer something else. Like I know people like the shape of brushes like that. So this is again a setting brush. So it's called a setting brush, which I feel, yeah, it could work, you know, especially for under eye powders. You want to set your concealer, that's fine. But I do think this fits really nicely on top of the cheekbones as well for highlighting. So as you can see, some brushes, the names may not correlate to how you're going to use it. But if it works out for you, you can definitely multi-purpose a brush as well. And just a little quick one when it comes to maybe bronzing and contouring. So for example, for bronzer, you would try to find something that has longer bristles. So even like the Morphe one that I keep bringing in as an example, you can see the bristles are really long. And that's because when it comes to bronzer, you don't want a concentrated application. If not, you're going to have like a brown patch on your forehead, you know. So this one's my favorite. This I think is the Morphe, what is it? M500. So same thing, very long bristles, natural bristles, because great for powder, and it flares out from a very thin ferrule. So when I apply the bronzer, it's just very diffused and sometimes not very noticeable, which is kind of what I like. I'm generally not a fan of getting really bronzy, you know, and all that, because I don't wear a lot of makeup on a daily basis anymore. But this works really well for bronzing, in my opinion. Or if you want a really light dusting of powder to set your makeup, something like that can work as well. So you can always multi-purpose a brush. This one is great for applying contouring powder, or let's say, you know, cream contours as well, because it's synthetic. So this is the Real Techniques contour brush. It came from their Core Collection set. Fits quite nicely underneath the cheekbones. It can also work as like a cream blush brush, I suppose. So something like that can work. So as you can see, the difference ultimately when it comes to cheek brushes is that it's a lot smaller versus the foundation brushes, because ultimately foundation brushes, they want to cover more surface on your skin. The last brush I want to show you is, I'm sorry, it's kind of out of shape, but you know, it's the typical flat brush. So this is the Luxe Face Paint brush from Zoeva. As you can see, it has a very straight line, or it's supposed to. I don't know what happened to my brush, but what it does is natural bristles, so it's for powder. And what you're going to do is you're going to dip it into your contouring powder, not bronzer, because bronzers usually are shimmery. I did a whole class on the difference if you want to check that out. And then if you put it into contouring powder, you just go underneath your cheekbone and you kind of like draw that line. You can use this brush to kind of like blend it out a little bit, but the main benefit of this brush is the precision it gives you in applying products like that. Now I'm going to move on to eye brushes. Now let's talk about the eye brushes. So there are, again, it's a whole new category. You have a lot of different kinds of brushes. There are ultimately 3 categories of eye brushes. So you have blending brushes, you have shader brushes to apply the color on your lid, as well as pencil brushes to kind of give you that precision when it comes to applying shades. So let's talk about blending brushes first. There are ultimately 2 different kinds of blending brushes in my opinion. You have a tapered blending brush like the MAC 217, and then you have a fluffy blending brush like the Luxe Soft Crease from Zoeva. So as you can see, I will try and bring it for you. You can first of all see the difference in the ferrule. So the tapered blending brush is, like its name suggests, it's tapered, pinched at the top, whereas the the Zoeva one is round throughout. So if I bring it like that, you can kind of see the difference, right? Because of the tapered ferrule, this one is a lot, not a lot, but narrower versus the fluffy one. So what is the difference? It ultimately depends on, first of all, the amount of eyelid space you have and the look that you want. So generally for people with smaller eyelids or monolids, I generally recommend tapered brushes because they give you, okay, so if you see, when tapered brushes touch your skin, they kind of touch less surface area when you blend. Whereas for fluffy brushes, if you touch it to your skin, it basically kind of like touches a lot more surface area. So if you blend, your eyeshadow may be more blown out than what you want. So if you don't have a lot of eyelid space to work with, something like the tapered one will work better. So if you didn't see, hopefully, I don't know if you can tell. Okay, generally I prefer natural bristle blending brushes. The same thing, because of the natural bristles, it holds onto the product and it slowly deposits it as you blend, so it makes blending a lot easier. If you use a synthetic one, so I know like one of the most famous one is the Sigma E40. I have that, I just don't know where it went. But ultimately what that does is, because it's synthetic, when you dip into your eyeshadow, and the moment you kind of like touch that area of your eyelid, a lot of product will end up there. So then you kind of have to be more, how would I say, be more careful when you use synthetic blending brushes. So for me, I always recommend a natural bristle blending brush. A fluffy one if you have more lid space, and a tapered one if you have, monolids or smaller Asian eyelids. Then we also have shader brushes. Shader brushes are, it's kind of like the petal brush from the foundation. It's kind of like this, where basically the main goal of these kind of brushes is to apply the color. So if you can see, this is an e.l.f. eyeshadow C brush. I love this. It's only, I think, $3 USD, I think, but it's very good. And it's tapered here, but it's flat like that. So I dip it into my eyeshadow and I'll just put the color on my mobile eyelid. Now when I do that, I'm not going to use this brush to blend, because first of all, if you can see, the bristles of the shader brush, sorry, hold on, so I don't know if you can see this, but the bristles are a lot shorter and it's a lot denser, right, versus a blending brush like that. So what is the difference? This one is to kind of give you the color deposition of, the main color you want on your eyelid. But when you want to blend it out, you're going to go something that's longer bristled and less dense, so that it helps to blend it out a lot more. Alright, and the last one, if you want really precise application, it's going to be a pencil brush. So for example, this is the pencil brush from Sigma. As you can see, very, very little brushes. They are densely packed, not very long bristles as well. So what this does is, if you want concentrated color at a specific spot on your eyelid, this is your best friend. So I actually like to use this when it comes to applying color in my outer V. So it's really good for just depositing color, and then same thing, going back to a blending brush, blend it out. So like you can see again, the difference in the length of bristles, the density of the bristles as well. So that's ultimately what the differences are. Just a little quick note on lip and eyebrow brushes. So eyebrow brushes, there are a few specially catering to eyebrows. So for example, this is a Zoeva, what does it say? So for example, this is a Zoeva brow line brush. It's a angled brush that's wider than normal, and it's supposedly helping you to shape your eyebrows. It's not a very long bristle brush, giving you a lot of control. And then of course you have a typical angled brush like that, slightly longer bristles, if you can see. But what I honestly feel, in my opinion, is that angled brushes, they pretty much work the same for me. So I actually don't use this much. I use the typical one more because I feel that you can use this for more purposes. Like for example, this one, I can also use it to use eyeshadow to line my eyes. You know, and I can use it if I really am, you know, out of brushes. I can use this for concealer to kind of like clean up my lip line or anything like that. And then lip brushes. Now I can't find my specific lip brush, but what lip brushes are, it's mostly, I feel, for makeup artists when you want precise application of lipstick. My favorite brush to actually apply lipstick for my clients is not a lip brush when it comes to the market. This is the Real Techniques brush. And it actually says this is a Real Techniques detailer brush. Now, because it's so small, precise, and it's again tapered at the top, I hope you can see that. This is great for, you know, getting the cupid's bow of the lips and, you know, kind of like cleaning it up with the edges. So I use this a lot on my clients. I don't use brushes that are said to be lip brushes, but I mean, you know, to each its own. So as you can kind of see, the market, you know, they will market certain brushes for certain purposes, but if you can you know, you can use the brush for anything really if you just feel comfortable using it and it gives you the results that you want. Now that we've gone through most of the brushes available on the market, what do I generally recommend when it comes to an ultimate makeup beginner? The first thing I think you definitely need would be a foundation brush. I would recommend something with an angle. So like I said in the previous video, you can kind of use this for different purposes. You don't have to buy the specific brush, you know. Real Techniques have a lot more affordable options, but if you have something that's dense, compact, it will allow you to apply foundation. In a pinch, it can help you apply concealer. It can also help you with cream products like bronzers, cream blushes, and cream contours as well. So that's the first one. The second one, I do feel you do need to have a powder brush, because sometimes when you buy powder foundations or powders, they don't come with applicators, or they come like with that sponge. If you use that sponge to apply your foundation, for example, let's say you get like a L'Oreal True Match powder, you want to set your makeup, it usually comes with a sponge like that. Mine is gross, I'm sorry. The sponge will really apply a lot of product at one certain spot, so it'll give you really high coverage. If that is not something you want, I would actually recommend investing in a powder brush. I would recommend something that has long bristles, pretty flat out, so it covers a lot more surface, so it's a lot more natural, and something that is natural bristled. So I would recommend getting a powder brush if that is what you need. When it comes to cheeks, I do think that you can kind of have a bronzer and blush brush together. You don't have to buy separate ones. So one that I do recommend is something like that. It's slanted, so it works great for blush. It can work great for bronzers, and you know, you can actually pinch it. So if the bristles are too flat out for you, you can kind of like slowly pinch it, or you can even use a bobby pin and, like, you know, press it down, and then you kind of have that line. You can also use it for contouring if you want to. So something like that is pretty versatile. So I would recommend something like that for a cheek brush. Again, you don't have to get this brand, even though Zoeva was pretty affordable when I bought it. And then for highlighting, I have to tell you that my personal favorite for highlighting is the Morphe one. But do you specifically need a highlighting brush? No, not necessarily. If you even want to, you can take like the tip of the blush brush and like dip it into your highlighter and go along your cheekbones. So it's not necessary, but if you are thinking of a highlighting brush, I do like this one. And then when it comes to eye brushes, so I do think you need a minimum of 3 brushes. So if you watched my class on the 3 basic eyeshadow looks you can do, I talked about 4 different brushes. The tapered blending brush, the fluffy blending brush, the shader brush, and the pencil brush. But if you're starting out, just need 3. So pencil brush, the one that's really controlled, precise, because if you're going to do any like precision work, you know, you want to apply a certain color at a certain place, this is your tool. And then you're going to need a shader brush, like that. Some people ask me, can I use my fingers? Of course you can, but your finger will not give you as much control as this brush does. So if I, let's say, want to apply a product like that, my product will be in a certain shape, whereas if I use my finger, it's not going to be as precise. So that's something to keep in mind. But this brush, I remember I bought it for $3 USD, so definitely something I think you can invest in. And the last one will be blending brushes. Now if you really cannot afford these two, I highly recommend getting a blending brush, because that's something actually your fingers can't do or do well, in my opinion. So I actually like Zoeva blending brushes. So if you have a lot of lid space or you like blown out eyeshadows, the soft crease from Zoeva is my favorite. It reminds me of the Sigma E40, except it's natural bristles. So it covers a lot more area, but it feels really good. It doesn't feel scratchy on the eyelids. Honestly, the MAC 217, right? It feels actually scratchy on my eyelids. I don't use it much at all, and I don't know if you can actually tell my ferrule is rusty. Is it rusty? Or like it's tainted. It's just because I don't use it anymore. So I don't like this as much. However, if you want a tapered one, there are 2 good options that I would recommend. So they have this one's the Sigma E25 and this is the Morphe F433. They are pretty similar. The Sigma one is a little bit shorter, so more control, like that. And it's also smaller. So if you have smaller eyelids, this is a good one. You can see they're both tapered. So I would recommend these 2 over the MAC. And the MAC one wasn't very cheap either, so definitely get a blending brush that can work for you. So these are or at least get a blending brush, shader, and pencil, and that's what I recommend for the eyes. The entire face, generally you only need 6 brushes, like that, I feel. The last part ultimately is, brushes are not cheap. How are you going to take good care of them? Now, I would recommend washing your brushes maybe once a week or at least twice a week, because you know, especially natural brushes, they hold on to a lot of bacteria, so you don't want to be spreading that over your face. I personally love this soap from Daiso. This works really well in removing the product off my brushes, so I definitely recommend this if you can find it. If not, I actually just use any like face soap that I don't really like on my face, because it's gentle enough. I also bought these 2 things from Daiso. You can find them. This is actually a silicone mat from the kitchen section, so I think it's for you to put your pots if it's hot, or you know, to use it to hold the pots if it's hot. But one thing great about this is, I don't know if you can see, it has ridges like that. So what I do, if let's say I have a lot of product on the brushes, I swirl it around and it removes the product wonderfully. So I definitely use this. I just throw it in the sink, do that. So it's a cheap alternative to the Sigma, I think it's like the washing mats or something. And then there's this, which is also in the laundry section. I'm not exactly sure what's it called. It says laundry board, but I honestly don't know how you use this for laundry. But same thing, put your fingers in, do that. Great for eye brushes. This is really good for face brushes. So I would recommend, you know, getting something, or of course, you know, you can just do it on your fingers. That's fine. Now, when it comes to drying your brushes though, I would recommend leaving it upside down. So when you're done washing it, if you can, point it like upside down like that, so that the water doesn't go into the ferrule. Because what happens if you let it to dry like that, if you put it back in the container or something, the water can go in. It may disrupt the glue, and then what happens is your bristles could fall out a lot easier because the glue is weakened. So, you know, if you have like a water bottle or something, use a rubber band and like hold it, and then you can have like a few brushes upside down. If not, you can leave it like that on the table, maybe preferably over an edge so there's more like circulation. But other than that, I've been doing that for years, and this MAC brush actually has been with me for 7 years. So definitely take care of your brushes well. You don't have to buy them over and over again if you treat them well. The tools like the ones I mentioned are useful, but if let's say you don't want to do that, always you can just use your hands to wash it out. It's perfectly fine. Alright, I hope this class was useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.